Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us today for the first session in the Heart and Soul with Dr. Timothy D. Kanold webinar series. For those who aren't familiar with Hawker Brownlow education, since 1985 we've empowered F to 12 teachers and educational professionals with the tools and skills, such as these webinars, to improve classroom and raise student performance. My name is Richard McKenzie and I'm the Marketing Manager here at Hawker Brownlow Education based in beautiful sunny Melbourne. If you'd like to contact us, please feel free to email us at orders@hbe.com.au and join in the conversation on any one of our social media platforms. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Timothy Kanold, who is an award-winning educator, author, and consultant. He's a former Director of Mathematics and Science and served as Principal of Adlai Stevenson High School, which, if you've been involved with the PLC at Work process, you may recognise as being really the birthplace of that process with the DeFores. Tim is committed to equity and excellence for students, faculty and school administrators, and of course a substantial part of that is the effective delivery of the PLC process by faculty and administrators. He's a past president of the National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics, and is a prolific author as a co-author of several best-selling maths textbooks over several decades, and author or co-author of 13 books on K-12 mathematics and school leadership. And one of those is the 2018 Gold Medal IPPY Award-winning and best-selling book Heart, which will be followed up with the upcoming book Soul, which will be due to release next year. And with that, I will pass over to Tim. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Richard. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning to be on the call. So I'm actually coming to you from Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. And so it is 5 p.m. here and getting towards evening, but I'll keep in mind the day before, just so you know, that's my frame of reference. And I'm really honored that you've taken the time to join me this morning and to dig into some of these issues about taking care of our own professional wellness and the heart and soul of our professional life. If you happen to listen to my keynote address at the international summit that we did, the PLC summit for Australia, there will be some parts of what we're going to look at today that might feel familiar. If you have not done so, that's fine. And I would tell you, I'm really excited about the fact that this is going to be a 3-part series. So if you like what we did today, hopefully you'll come back November 11th and 18th when we do it again, and I'll share that with you at the very end. So to frame this a little bit, I do want to, this webinar series, I want to take a look at it from this point of view. You and I, because we chose education as our field of work, as our profession, chose a profession of emotional labor, and as such, it can be exhausting. And in Heart, when I wrote the book Heart, I wrote about this idea of a heartprint, and that our heartprint creates interfusion with others. It's the impact we have on others, the people around us. The new book I'm working on, Soul, that Richard alluded to, is going to actually come out in February of this coming year of 2021. So just as your new school season begins. And that book, Soul, is more about interfusion with the good, that it's not just enough to have an impact, but we have sort of this moral responsibility in our profession to have a positive impact. And so in Heart, I talked a lot about what's the distinctive impression and impact our heart leaves on others. But in Soul, I'm going to talk about and define how we pursue our own moral good and stay healthy and balanced in order to create that good in others. And today, I want to share with you just a few of ideas that bring some of these concepts of joy and happiness in the workplace into perhaps some meaningful steps you and I can take to stay balanced. And as I know you're getting towards the end of your school, of this particular school year, but these will be things to think about, not just for today, but for the long term of your professional journey. And then 2020, for you as well as for us here in the United States, has for sure been a time of relentless stress and change. If there was ever a time to need to figure out how do we stay balanced with all the stuff coming at us, it's now. And so we're going to look at that a little bit in this session. First thing I want to do is talk to you about the fact that in Heart, I wanted the H of Heart to stand for happiness. And I found out that there's a science to whether or not you and I are happy at work. And one of the places I went to learn more about it was this book called The Happiness Track by Emma Sepla. For us here in the United States, Sepla is a researcher at Stanford and runs the happiness center there. And she said that happiness is a state of heightened positive emotion. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So if you think about those words, what's our happiness? It's a state of being, and it's a state of being in a positive emotion. And I'm supposed to come to work like that every day? Yes, even this morning at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. And she says something that's very interesting from the PLC perspective, the professional learning community perspective, which is that when you and I are in a state of heightened positive emotion at work, it heightens our influence over our peers. And is that not what we're supposed to do? Come to work and influence our peers, work together to do what's the best in terms of student learning. But what I discovered as I started to work on soul was something a little bit different, that there's this difference between happiness and joy. Yeah, and I can tell you these words are used somewhat interchangeably quite often in our language, but the reality is there is a difference. Happiness, it turns out, sort of ebbs and flows. You and I can be having a great day and be very happy in that day, and all it takes is for someone to say something to us or for someone to do something that sort of triggers a negative emotion in us, and all of a sudden our happiness just dissipates. Happiness can be very elusive because it's experiential. It's an outward, it's sort of things that can happen to us. So it has this outward sense. But joy is a little bit different. Joy is more internal. We can have really unhappy events happen to us, like this pandemic has been. And then during that process, we can make a decision to choose joy or not. Joy is an internal condition. So there is a little bit of a difference there, because in happiness, it's the often thing, like none of us have been able to control the pandemic. I mean, we can do things to try to minimize our own personal risk, but the reality is we didn't cause it. We didn't cause the problem. It happened to us. But joy, on the other hand, is an internal decision you and I make. And so I want to look at that a little bit. In fact, one of the very simple things that we can do on a daily basis to develop joy in our lives, and therefore work on our happiness a little bit, is the outcome of practicing gratitude. So joy is the result of you and I saying, today I'm going to practice gratitude. And it sounds so simple, but the neuroscience behind this is pretty clear, and I do write about the brain research behind this in Soul. And one of our colleagues that talks about this, Brene Brown, she says, and I write about this in Soul, she says this: when I'm flooded with fear and scarcity, and isn't that kind of what's happened with the pandemic? Fear of what's next, all the things we can't change, I'm not going to be able to deal with the technology, all of the stuff that has happened with having to adjust. And then scarcity, meaning our worlds seem to have shrunk. You know, we can't travel the way we used to travel and so on. She says, I try to recall forward joy and sufficiency by acknowledging the fear and then transforming it into gratitude. And she actually does this, she says, if you want to practice gratitude in order to lead to greater joy on a daily basis, say this out loud: I'm feeling vulnerable today. Now, I want to stop there for a minute to tell you that something really great about this is in, I think, the third session we're going to do, the one on November 18th, I'm going to talk and give you some really specific ideas on how to create a culture of belonging, vulnerability, and validation in your school culture, in your classroom every day. And I'm saving that for I'm going to do that in the third session. So you'd have to come back on November 18th for that one. But she says, I'm feeling vulnerable today. That's okay. I'm so grateful for blank. And then she goes on, doing this has absolutely increased my capacity for joy. So I figured once I've been working on Soul for 2 years. And once I read about this, and I think in Soul, I point out 4 different ways to practice gratitude to feel that inward joy that despite outward conditions. And this is one of them. But what I'd like you to do is use the chat box. I'm going to get quiet for a minute. It'll be pretty awkward because it's like, really? He's not going to say anything for a minute? Correct, I'm not. I'm going to give you a minute and just fill in the blank. I've started doing this now every morning when I first get up. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of grumbly. I'm kind of not really all that happy today. I'm feeling a little stressed out, but I am grateful for blank. What is that blank? So if you would, yeah, a lot of you are already filling it in, but if you would type in the chat box and fill in a response, that would be great. Just whatever you want to say. Fill in the blank. I'm so grateful for what in today, in this moment this morning. What are you really grateful for? All right, ready? Go. 1 minute. I'm going to time it. Timer. I'm laughing at coffee because there are some days that's so true. All right, thanks everybody. I appreciate it. And again, I realize when I ask you to fill in the chat, I'm challenging you to say something publicly, and you may or may not want to do that. So please just do it. Write it on a piece of paper if you'd rather than putting it publicly. But it's nice to be able to see kind of how we're all in this together as well. You know, something I want to explain here is that actually, the reason that was an important question, or the reason why this works to actually ask it, is it actually activates sort of a happiness center in our brains. The neuroscience research shows that the most potent activator of brain circuits involved in human happiness is actually compassion. Yeah, and our ability to come to work despite our circumstances and become compassionate. So what does this mean? Let me illustrate this a little bit. So the brain has kind of this pain network, but it also has a reward network. So when you take the time just to fill out something as simple as I'm grateful for blank, or when you take the time to demonstrate compassion for the suffering of others, that actually activates a reward network in our brains and makes us feel better. To understand it though is this idea that empathy, I don't know how much you've really thought compassion heals in this sense. Empathy is an awareness of the suffering of others. And by suffering, I don't necessarily mean major suffering. Suffering could be as simple as I stubbed my toe. I mean, suffering could be as simple as I was really looking forward to this event with my family, and then we had to cancel it. You know, or it can also be something major. We have a friend who's actually came down with COVID-19 and they're struggling to get on the other side of it, right? So empathy is awareness of suffering. I'm aware my students are suffering. I'm aware that my colleagues are suffering, and then taking the risk to be emotionally involved in it. In other words, I'll actually feel that suffering. That's called empathy. And the reason why a lot of us don't demonstrate empathy is because it activates a pain network in our brain. So it actually hurts. Like when we actually sympathize with that person that stubs their toe, or empathize with them, the person who stubs their toe, it's like we can feel the pain in our own toe a little bit, right? Or when someone tells you about their eye surgery, you're like, start holding your eye, you know, right? So there's this kind of response that we have once we get emotionally involved. So when I have students who are really struggling and I get emotionally involved in that struggle, that I can feel their pain. That's a very otherness-centered kind of mindset as a teacher. And what happens is compassion is kind of is on the road to empathy, but a little bit farther down the road. So I not only become emotionally involved, but I wish to see relief for that suffering. I genuinely want you to not be suffering. And then I act to help relieve it. Maybe I donate my time to some particular organization, right? Maybe I sit down and talk with you one-on-one in order to be a listener at a time that you really need it. It's just I do some small or large action to help relieve that suffering, and that actually then feels good. So compassion is actually, get back there, compassion actually impacts our happiness. Both our outward condition of happiness based on our experiences, because that's an experience that brings happiness, as well as our inward condition of joy. Now, there's a bonus to compassion, and that is it's the antidote to avoiding burnout. Yeah, so let's take a look at this, and then I'm going to ask you another question for the chat box. It turns out that there are 3 indicators of burnout as we go through a school year. Now, you're getting near the end of yours, and with all the stress you've been under this school year, I suspect you have colleagues that you know of who have been close to this feeling of burnout, if not feeling burned out, at least occasionally. And by burned out, it doesn't mean necessarily, completely, it's just like sometimes being overwhelmed, by the demands of it. So what's really interesting about this, I should say, is that of these 3 indicators of burnout, compassion actually can help us avoid burnout. Let me explain why. First of all, the first indicator that someone that you know or yourself is getting burned out is emotional exhaustion. You are not taking care of yourself. You don't practice self-care. You are not staying healthy from a fitness point of view. You are not staying healthy in terms of paying attention to limits on your time and your energy. You fail to cope in a way that's healthy. Something triggers anger and you have an unhealthy response. Our emotions like anger and fear and sadness are not bad emotions. They're only bad if we have an unhealthy response to them and then making things worse for others. A healthy response is where we actually then use that emotion, right, to not allow ourselves to get burned out. So emotional exhaustion is an indicator. A second one is lack of personal accomplishment. This means I can't feel that I'm getting anything done this year. I feel like I have no value. I can't feel my impact. And heart's really all about impact. And so one of the things I recommend is that every Friday you have some kind of celebration of the impact you've had that week so that you can feel the personal accomplishments of you and your colleagues on an ongoing basis. Because whatever small steps you made this week, I'll guarantee you it helps somebody. It helps some of your students, even if it doesn't feel like it to you. And then the worst part of all is what's called depersonalization sets in. And depersonalization is where you're no longer a student that has feelings and needs and is suffering. You're just another person on my list of stuff I have to get done. This is my job. This is just a job, and if you just get your stuff turned in, I get my job done easier. So I start to depersonalize my connection with you. And that's a really dangerous place to be. One thing I want to say about this is the reason this is connected to compassion is because let's go back and look at what compassion was. When I demonstrate compassion, I act to help relieve the suffering of others. In other words, they are no longer depersonalized. I can sense that I'm accomplishing something by providing that for you. And then the emotional exhaustion part, I want to talk about how to get that done. Some of you may be familiar with the work of my colleague, Tina Bogren. Tina wrote a book called Take Time for You, and I really love her book. And it's a solution tree book, a Brownlow book. So if you have a chance and need some summer reading, it's a great summer read. I would highly recommend it to you as a way to avoid the burnout that we're talking about, the emotional exhaustion that we're just discussing. So here's that burnout compassion connection. Get ready for this. Under the same amount of stress, you and I are under the same amount of stress. We're both feeling a little overwhelmed. Interventions to raise one's level of compassion, meaning they're for others or compassion for others. Not, there is a whole nother piece on self-compassion, but not today. That's for a different time. But to raise one's levels of compassion for others could prevent burnout or counteract burnout in people who already have it. So two of us are under the same amount of stress. If I receive an intervention or support or help to raise my level of compassion for the students that I'm teaching, it could not only prevent my burnout, but counteract burnout if I've already gone there. So having a compassionate culture becomes a really important thing. And I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that in just a second. The one last caveat, though, I want to mention on this before I ask you my question is to not confuse compassion with pity. And this is something I think I've always known, but I don't think I don't know if I was aware of it, I guess is the way to say it. And maybe I was demonstrating pity and I should not have been. Here's the difference. Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. So when I show you pity, it's as if I'm better than you are, and so therefore maybe I have more authority than you or whatever. I see myself as better or I see myself as not having your condition, and so I pity you, and therefore our relationship is not one of equals. I'm doing this out of pity for your situation or your environment or whatever going on for you. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. In other words, you know what? I've been there too. I have felt that too. I've had that same problem before too. I know the pain of divorce. I know that, whatever it might be. So we don't do it out of pity. We do it out of genuine desire to see you as a fellow human being and not wanting you to suffer the way you're suffering. So it's a relationship between equals, and that's just an important element to remember. Doesn't matter what our job roles are, what our positional authority is in the school. When we demonstrate compassion to one another, it's out of our humanity for each other as equals. And that's a very important but subtle element. So here's what I want to ask you to take a minute to type in the chat box if you're comfortable. If you don't want to make it a public, typing and letting us know, then just take a minute to get quiet and write down an answer to this question. We now know that it's probably the most important thing we can do is create a culture of compassion in our schools. And what I'd like to ask is to just take a minute to write about in a sentence or two, how is compassion of others modeled and taught in your school? If I was to come to your school, whenever I'll ever be allowed to do that again, and just walk your hallways or walk into your classrooms or watch your teacher team meetings, would I see evidence that compassion is modeled and taught in your school? What would that evidence look like? Okay, so I'm going to get quiet for a minute and just give you a chance to think about that. Are we a compassionate culture? What evidence would I show Tim Kanold that we have that? We are compassionate. Yeah, we are. Okay, all right, good luck. Go. All right. Thanks, everybody. And thank you for giving us some really specific things to do. And one thing I want to just encourage you to think about is that, think about this idea from a very practical, here are the things I do, not necessarily what a program does. Okay, because it's good to have the program, you want that too. But what are actual acts that the students and the teachers do daily that demonstrate compassion towards one another? And we have some answers like that too that are in the chat box, so thanks for sharing that. So good, so this is an important element, and I write quite a bit about this and the importance of it in both heart and soul in the chapters on compassion. All right. This gets us to the E part of heart, which was the idea of how do you and I come to work fully engaged, and I think avoid, in a year like this, the emotional exhaustion part, so that we are fully engaged each day. To illustrate this, I want to share with you a report from Gallup, which was an international study, by the way. It did also include international, countries from around the world, just so you know. And one of the things that they said in their report on whether or not we are engaged teachers in our work life, and by engaged, by teachers, they're saying educators. They're using this word somewhat loosely, but they mean all of us in the profession of education. And one of the things they talked about in the report was that if you and I are left alone, we're most likely to not fully engage in our work life. And I found that interesting result, because I was like, really? So yeah, because there's something about when you work interdependently with others that causes you to not want to let them down. And also causes them to sort of notice you and I, if we're starting to drift towards not being fully engaged. So there's something about the PLC life that actually promotes our full engagement in our work. Here's what some of the Gallup research said, and I want to I'll explain these. They said there's kind of three ways we bring ourselves to work on a daily basis. Now, I want to just say that I think those of you that are in this webinar this morning probably are not a very good cross section, because you're in the webinar. So if you're in the webinar, you're probably number one. You're an engaged teacher. You look for new and better ways to achieve the outcomes of our work, which is student learning and students becoming better citizens, right? So you're probably in that category. Not engaged teachers, they say, are satisfied with their jobs but not emotionally connected. Now that was really an important phrase that Gallup used, because not emotionally connected means I become dispassionate about my students. They become depersonalized. They're just a bunch of numbers and grades and things I got to get done. But when we stay emotionally connected to them, that can be painful sometimes if they're suffering, but it also can lead to compassion. So engaged teachers definitely are compassionate teachers. And also notice how it's this idea of looking for new and better ways, that I always am trying to improve my craft, which is probably why you're also in this session with me. And then they actually just, oh, by the way, turned out that internationally, 29% of people in our profession are fully engaged in our work life. And in Australia and New Zealand, in that area of the world, it's 31%. You're a little bit above the international average. But as I suspect, those of us that are on this webinar are much higher than that 1/3, that 30% roughly. And they actually had a category, not engaged teachers ended up being about 57%, and they had a category called actively disengaged teachers. They are unhappy, they are not happy, they're letting their life be hijacked in outside circumstances. They blame others, they act like a victim, and so they actually try to undermine others because they're unhappy, they want other people to be unhappy. And that's the burnout area of our work life, and that's why we want to avoid it at all costs. So here's my question to you, and feel free to just type this in. I want to tell you, there's no judgment on whatever you type in. I'm asking the question because I need to make a point. And your answer, whether you realize it or not at the time you type it in, will help fill in that point, as you'll see. So what I'd like to do is just ask you to dwell on that. Why is it that only about a third of the people in our profession, roughly a third, it kind of runs from 29, 31, 32, 33, depending on the region of the world you're in and so on. But why is it that only about a third of our profession, not you perhaps, but think of some of your colleagues, come to work and only about a third of us fully engage in our work life on a daily basis? And that means look for new and better ways to achieve the outcomes of our work. So take a guess, type it in the chat box. I'll get quiet for a minute. And feel free to just take a guess. In your mind, why do you think it's so low? Go ahead, as you are ready. These are great. Thank you. Really good answers. I appreciate you taking the time to put them in. Wow, you guys are awesome. Okay, that was a little more than a minute. And I appreciate you filling it in. Feel free to keep typing something in or something that's coming up to your mind as I move us forward. So I think I look at your answers and I do see sort of two categories of answers. And if you've been following along, there's sort of this theme of internal versus external. Let me explain. First, the question really is about, is our professional life our vocation or our career? Vocation, by the very nature of what that word means, is a calling I hear. Hidden in the word vocation itself is the Latin for the word voice. So is teaching your voice? Is this the voice of who you are? Parker Palmer says in his book, before I can tell my life what I want it to do, what I want to do with it, what I'm going to become, what am I going to do for a living, who am I must listen for the truths and the values at the heart of my own identity, not in the standards by which I must live, but the standards by which I cannot help but live if I'm living my own life. The reason I like that so much, the reason I like that so much is because you have been through an almost impossible year in so many ways. We have all been through something we never could have imagined. Not in my lifetime, not in our lifetime. And yet, you don't have any choice but to live through it because this is your vocation. It's who you are, it's what you do, so you adapt. When you have a career mentality, it's not quite the same. The frontal cortex is in charge. You take an inventory of your talents. What am I good at? You hone your professional skills. You work really hard at it. You strategize the right route to climb upward towards success. Now, there's nothing wrong with a career mentality. It's okay. But when things get tough, we don't tend to stay dedicated to it because it's not our vocation. In the vocation mentality, you're not living on the ego level of your consciousness. The way it's explained in the kind of the neuroscience of this is we're down in the substrate. Some activity or some injustice has called us to the deepest level of our nature and demanded an active response. I will dedicate my life to helping children, to helping the next generation of children learn. And I'm not, it may pay well or not so well, and it may make my life more convenient or not, but that's not why I'm doing it. David Brooks in a wonderful book called The Second Mountain. This would also be, if you're interested in this topic, a summer reading book for you. It's funny for me to say a summer reading for you since winter's coming up here, but you know what I'm talking about. And he says, look, in the first mountain of our lives, and in that part of our life, professional life, it's about reputation management, one of achievement, ambition, and competition with others. Life is hurried. When I'm on the first mountain climb, I'm saying, hey, what's my profession doing for me? What's my school doing for me? How is my profession making my life better? And it's all about what is the profession doing for me. It's a very inward, kind of like, I don't want to say ego-driven, but it is in some ways. In the second mountain life, he said, at some point, you and I as professionals, because we chose education, go, oh, that's why like for me, I think I was teaching 12 years before I realized, oh, I'm in this profession because this is who I am. This is my life. I'm serving an ultimate good. I chose to pursue the moral joy of teaching in a way. And when that happens, despite all the stressors that come at me, life is busy, but it's not hurried. And he says this, in the second mountain climb, you stop asking, what's the profession doing for you? And instead you ask this question, what's my profession asking of me? So it becomes a life of contribution. What is my profession asking me to contribute to it? In this day, in this next class, in this next group of students, in this next year. And it changes. It's a much deeper climb, deeper kind of life. When we live that first mountain climb, the hurried life looks like this. I'm preoccupied quite often. I'm unable to be fully present due to the demands of my job. I feel physically and emotionally drained every day. If something unexpected happens in the next 2 weeks, I do not know what I'll do. There are just so many demands of my time right now. And that sentence in red is really the kicker. I just don't have time to fully notice others. In the hurried life, emotional exhaustion kicks in. In the hurried life, depersonalization kicks in. In the hurried life, I don't have time to even notice my colleagues or my students at the level they need me to notice them. Now one way to deal with this hurried life is to do something that is recommended by Ryan Holiday. Now, this book that you see on the screen right now, Ryan Holiday, Stillness is the Key, I want to encourage you to look at that and consider, again, another summer reading book. This book has been now published in 29 different languages, over 3 million copies sold, and it's all about making the decision to get quiet some time of each day of your professional life, personal and professional life. And he said and he does indicate that one way to do that is through journals. Now, I don't think journaling is for everybody necessarily, although I think it can really have a great benefit. He said, but Holiday makes the point that journals aren't for the writer. That journals aren't for the reader. Journals are for the writer. And he said, what journals do is it slows you down long enough to avoid this hurried life. And you're like, but I don't have time to journal. And he's like, no, actually, if you do take the time to journal, it will take you off of the hurried life pace. If you don't have time to actually get still, then that does mean you're victim to the hurried life. And so he says, take a look and just take some time to ask yourself some simple questions. Number one, what's the smallest step I can take today toward a big thing? What's a small step that I can take I'm going to start journaling. So today I'll take 1 minute to journal. It's a small step. Why am I so worked up about this? That you ask yourself that question. When you feel yourself getting stressed out, ask yourself the simple question, why am I worked up about this, and write about it. And before you know it, you can't hardly figure out why you're worked up about it anymore. Or ask yourself something like this: how will today's difficulties reveal my character? How about that one? How will today's difficulties reveal my character? How will I respond in a healthy or a not healthy way? What do I care so much? Why do I care so much about impressing other people? That's probably true for all of us, but why do we care so much about it? Is that really important? And what is the harder choice I'm avoiding today? What's the conversation I need to have with someone? And so he said, just journal about these things, because it begins to get your life calmed down when we're feeling stressed. That this is something we can do during moments of stillness. And something we already practiced for gratefulness. What are the blessings? What are the things I'm grateful for today? When we do that, we move more towards the busy work life. I have a full schedule. I have a lot of activities. I'm balancing a lot of plates, including my team time, my family time, and some quiet reflective time daily. My job is physically and emotionally demanding. True? True. I cannot do the job without the help of others. So you see two things going on in the comparison here. In the busy life, we do take time for quiet, reflective time every day. That's a requirement. And no matter how busy you are, you will not give that up. You won't say, well, I'll wait and have reflective time on Saturday. No, we do it in each day. And this means time away from the noise of our families, as well as the noise of our profession. And notice the last sentence: I can't do the job without the help of others. The professional learning community. I will work with others. So what we are to do is to seek this idea of something called quietude. Quietude is not my term. As you can see here, it comes from basically some neuroscientists that talk about this idea of us, you and I, getting quiet and silent each day. And here's what they say: freedom from noise, from all the noise of our work life, our personal life, and our daily tasks, our cell phones, our social media, all this stuff. Unites the quiet without and within. These are their words, these neuroscientists. Allowing our conscious workspace to do its thing. So when we get quiet, our brain starts cooking. To weave ourselves into the world that we're actually in, to discover where we fit in. And that's why I go there. Sorry, I forgot that. There we go. That when Ryan Holiday mentioned these questions, why am I so worked up about this? How will today's difficulties reveal my character? Why do I care so much about impressing other people? These are things that help us discover where we fit in this world today, in this moment I'm in my family life, and so on. That's the power of solitude and silence. And so we seek something that I am referencing as our slack-tide time. And many of you might know this. I did not know this before I started working on soul. But slack tide is this time about 45 minutes after high and low tide. There's a period of time called slack tide or slack water. And it's a short period of time where and these are their words, the definition of it's the words. A short period of time in a body of tidal water when the water is completely unstressed. It's called slack tide. Slack water. And I was like, man, wouldn't that be great to have a little period of time every day where you and I take a moment to be completely unstressed. In order to do what? To avoid the emotional exhaustion that could catch up with us, so that tomorrow we can come back in that happiness state, right? That state of heightened positive emotion. So with that, I just want to, I'm going to ask Richard to join me again so we can take a look at some questions that you might have. And you can enter those right into the question and answer box with a few minutes. We have about 10 minutes left. And what I'd like you to do is to think about, all right, of everything we've just talked about, is there anything that's just sort of a question that's coming up in your mind where you're like, oh, it'd be great if there was, if Tim could just talk about this, I'd be glad to answer your question, and or even make you aware of our 2 sessions in November. So on November 11th, I'm going to talk about living your life between the zeros. Now, in case you don't know what that is, living your life between the zeros is your first zero is the year you start our profession, and your second zero is the year you end in our profession. And we're going to take a really deep look into how to create a timeline of our professional lives and create spontaneous moments of incredible joy in the workplace. So it's going to be kind of fun. It's really quite a fun session together. And then on November 18th, we're going to do what I talked about earlier. We're going to look at thriving in community and creating a school-wide culture of vulnerability, belonging, and validation. And I realized that in these 2 sessions in November, I'm getting towards the end of your school year. So these will be designed to kind of set up some things for you to think about over your summer, and then getting ready for the following school year in 2021. So with that, any questions that you want to ask? I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, if there are any questions, please put them in the box. We've got one question here. I want to purchase some of those summer reading books. Any chance we get a list of the books discussed?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Richard, do we have the PDF for the presentation?
Yes, we've got that. There will also be the recording that will go up. There'll be a follow-up email I'll send out later on today. So we'll include those books in there, those summer reading books, because I think no time like the present to get on that and to take some of that time to process all that.
Yeah, and I think especially Ryan Holiday's book, it's actually, I have it somewhere. It's buried in a box that I've got. But, it's a really a fluid read, I think, and is based on the philosophy of the Stoics. But he does a great job at giving us a lot of practical solutions. I mean, there's a reason it sold 3 million book copies worldwide. So that would make a great book, along with Tina's book, I think, for summer reading.
Yeah, Tina's book, I think, is a great one to add to that list. Not only because it's a Hawker Brownlow book, but because she's, we had her on, as we've mentioned, for 2 webinars, and very well received. And like your work, Tim, it's just something that's not necessarily paid much attention to in the textbooks of teaching.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We've got a question here from Connie. What evidence of compassion would you expect to see in schools?
Yeah, so I think, Connie, to answer that, I'm glad you asked it. I'm going to get something. So that doesn't matter. We're in a Zoom. You guys have been through this before. So hold on with me just for a second. I'm just going to move my camera just for a bit, because I have to get something out. I want to get that. So don't. Yep. Thank you. Perfect. Go.
This is the joy of Zoom in these new normal times.
That's too funny. Okay. All right, I am back. Ha! That was good. That was awesome. So I think very specifically, we look for everything from, posters to, to actual intentional activities where we write up literally a set of notes every Friday that we call kudos, Kudos. sort of we call it our kudos memo to our entire community, in which we literally write up acts of compassion by our teachers and students that have been reported by our teachers and students. And we send that out to the community every single Friday. So that very and it can be almost anything that you would look for. So that's a very intentional act on our part. The second thing is we require every grade level team to actually come up with, as part of their SMART goal plans, their actual acts of compassion that they're going to use in their classrooms this year. So that's another one that I think is really helpful. And then we talk about how can all of our, I don't know what you call it in Australia, but we call it our co-curricular programs. So it'd be like our elementary, middle, or high school bands or drama departments and the arts. So we really challenge all of those programs to demonstrate how whatever they're taking on and doing will also demonstrate compassion as well. So, like how will it have compassion themes is what I mean. So those are just some of the ways that I think you can do it that are more practical by becoming intentional about it. So I think it's through the notes, it's through the intentionality of as a part of our curriculum, just building it into and weaving it throughout our curricular themes. Even when I was director of math and science, I was required to show how we were doing that in our math and science classes. And I remember thinking, like, don't you understand? This is math and science. It's supposed to be really hard. We're not compassionate people. And so actually showing how you can demonstrate compassion through our math and science curriculum and the way that we understand the language of that curriculum was quite a challenge. But the fact that our administrators were requiring us to do that actually helped serve, we had to report out on it, actually helped serve the nurturing of it in our culture. So those are some things I would add.
That's great, Tim. I think you touched on their intentionality. I think that's such an important thing. Often, it's not just in education, it's in all walks of life where we have these things floating around in our heads and we think we do them, but we don't. Part of it is actually getting out there and making the effort to do it.
Exactly. I totally agree with you, Richard. And I think that's part of, we have a saying about what gets done is what you pay attention to. And I think that's why it has to have that component to it. I do want to also, I saw there was a question about, how do we support colleagues who are actively disengaged? And I want to say, I do write about that. Actually, I provide several, quite a bit about it in Soul and a little bit about it in Heart. I think, and I love the way it's phrased, the way the question was asked by John, this idea of how do we support colleagues who are actively disengaged. I think you have to get to the heart of the reason of why they joined our profession in place. And so sometimes my first thing I do is I take that person back to, do you remember when you became a teacher, you joined our profession? And why did you join it? Like, what is your why? And can I help you reconnect back to that so that you can kind of remember the idea of this being our profession. The second thing I think is giving them some skills, some tools for developing self-compassion. Self-compassion is at some point, you get to a point where you must actually demonstrate some form of desire to relieve your own suffering. So you have to help that person realize where they're at the moment, what is the root cause of their suffering, and can you help them get to that place of demonstrating and relieving themselves from that suffering, whatever that suffering is, because it could be, that suffering could be, it's really usually it could be professional. I'm just in the wrong profession. It could be personal. It's something I'm going through right now in my life, and it just has nothing to do with my profession, and really it's none of your business. And in that case, all you can do is support them, not by solving their problem, but letting them know you're there to listen when they're ready. But they also can't keep harming students. So we have to help them see how their current behavior harms. And we're in a profession that literally expects us to do no harm. the last thing is the suffering could be caused by a wound from the past. I suffered quite a bit of anxiety in my early years of teaching because of anxiety I had during my middle school years. So I had to come to grips with that in order to finally not let that affect how I brought myself to my profession every day. So, I think those are things you can do, but ultimately we're not psychologists. We can only be the best we can be to listen to folks and then help guide them towards solutions, because I don't think any of us want to be in that place of being actively disengaged. And the way I've done it often, the last thing I'll just say about it is with the people I've worked with personally, it's one, trying to really get to understand and know I know we're over time here, their concern better. So listen to where they're coming from. But secondly, find someone in our school system, in our school, who they said to me they could work with, that they respected enough for wherever position they were on, that they would be willing to collaborate with that person. And then I would work hard to pair that person up, because I don't think you solve this dilemma alone. So another way to support that person is to support them with a human resource person, another teacher, who is able to connect and communicate with that person. So those are some things you can do, but it's complicated and it's very individual. Yeah.
Complicated, I think that's a good word to describe all manner of sins at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
all right, I guess with that, we should stop.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Tim. And thank you to everyone who joined us on the chat and asking questions. We really loved having your questions. It really makes these sessions well worthwhile. Global PD is there. You can, if you don't know anything about that, pop on the website. You can sign up for a free 14-day trial. One of Tim has an accredited mini course on there based on heart. So that's a great way to get to grips with the content of the book. The mini course supports the book, and the book supports the mini course. It's a really great way, an interactive way to learn from it. So thank you, Tim. We look forward to joining you again on the 11th of November for your next session.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks everybody for being with us this morning. I so appreciate it. I can't wait to share more and dig in deeper on November 11th. And in the meantime, seriously, Richard, if there's any questions that anybody has, if they email them to you, then we can incorporate that into November 11th. I'd be glad to do that.
Yep.
All right.
We'll send out a follow-up email later on today, and the recording will be online in the next 1 to 2 weeks.
Yeah, thanks. The last thing I'll say, I'm just so proud of us that I actually got on this webinar on time the day before. So it's really weird talking to you guys tomorrow. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye-bye.